Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, everybody. And
well, I think, yes, so I take over, I think, as there's a small technical problem. So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the last webinar in EUA's series on Bologna. Today, under the title, University Leaders Discuss the Rome Communiqué. And can I have the next slide, please? And more correctly, it should have said European university leaders and student representatives or student leaders discuss the outcomes of the Bologna Ministerial Conference and the Rome Communiqué, because we have Goha Yohannishan here with us, the chairperson of ESU, and Joseph Garel, the rector from Ramon Llull University in Spain and an EUA board member, and Marcin Palis, former rector of the university in Warsaw, Poland, and an EUA board member. And the gentleman who just tried to welcome you is Michael Murphy, our president, but he seemed to have a technical problem, so you have to be up with me for the next hour. To get started here, I probably give you hand over to Therese, and you get some technical instructions for this webinar. Therese?
Yes, I'm trying. Yeah.
No, we can't hear you. Before, yes.
Yes,
Now.
You should be hearing me now. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm sorry, this seems to be a doomed webinar because we are experiencing a few technical issues. Nevertheless, we are really happy that you can be here with us today. So just a few technical information right now. First of all, this webinar is being recorded. This seems even more important to say it as we are experiencing those technical issues. There will be a record publicly available, or I'm not sure if it's public, but it will be available on the EUA YouTube channel. So this is one thing. The second important point is that we would like this webinar to also be interactive. So it will be a discussion between our moderator and all the speakers, but you also have two ways of interacting with us. The first one is if you look at the other side, at your right side, there is a chat box, and you can send greetings and also point out to technical issues in that box or any other remark you may have. There is another tab next to it, which is called Q&A. We would ask you to put your questions to the speakers in that Q&A box. It's a moderated box, so this means that your question will not automatically appear after you type it, and it's normal. But you can also like the questions that are already in the Q&A and are asked by other people in the audience, so that the order of the questions can also shift. And finally, I would like to mention that there is a third tab, which is called Handouts. And under that tab, you will be able to find some resource documents. Right now, I think they are the Bologna Communiqué and annexes precisely, but also a few policy positions from EUA and ESU notably. All right, I think I've done all the technical announcements. I wish you an excellent webinar ahead, and I will be there on the back end. To you, Michael.
Thanks so much, Therese. I just try to, it doesn't, sorry. Now. Thanks so much, Therese. And I'm sure most, if not all of you, know a bit about the Bologna process. Just in case that you don't, I give a very, very short introduction on that. So the process is already on for 20 years. It has been established with the goal to bring the European higher education systems closer together to enable more exchange and collaboration among universities across Europe. And also, of course, to enhance the quality, but also the international attractiveness and visibility of European higher education. In particular, in the first decade, but continuing until now, there has been a strong emphasis on the structural change. So today, the 3-cycle degree, bachelor, master's, doctorates, we take that for granted, but that was relatively new 15, 20 years ago. Joint European approach on quality assurance has been established. You're all familiar with the standards and guidelines for quality assurance in the European higher education area. And also recognition, just to point to the Lisbon Recognition Convention, but also the European Credit and Accumulation Transfer System. Mobility has been one of the key goals of the process right from the beginning, staff and student mobility, but it has also been a means, of course, to enhance the growing together and the convergence between the different systems. And early on, the social dimension, equity and inclusion has been addressed to ensure that this becomes an experience for all and not just for a few. Later on, so from 2015 on, we have seen other topics emerging, such as learning and teaching, values, and in the meanwhile, you find also references to the Sustainable Development Goals and greening. How the process is done? Well, it's an intergovernmental process. Since last month, we have 49 countries with the accession of San Marino, plus the European Commission. And in addition, there are the so-called consultative members who fully participate in the process. So representing the European higher education sector and important stakeholder organizations. And among them, as you can see, the EUA, but also the European Student Union, the representation of the colleges, the Council of Europe, and they all come together in the Bologna follow-up group that happens normally twice a year, discuss work and establish dedicated working group, which work then on the specific topics. It's a relatively light process. So far, you see that here it has only one institution. Everything else is ambulant, created out of the resources of the participating members. And then every 2 or 3 years, the ministers get together, assess success or failure, and set out the goals for the next round in a communiqué. And this is precisely the point where we are now, or where we just have been. So 2 weeks ago, all 4 of us have been in, not physically, but virtually at the ministerial conference, and have attended the adoption of the Rome Communiqué, which will guide now the process for the next 4 years. And I spelled out here just a few of the topics that feature prominently in the communiqué. First of all, fundamental values, which is in the Bologna speech: autonomy, academic freedom, governance, participation of staff and students. For this topic, there will be a dedicated working group on the values, working on the values, which will engage in constructive dialogue and facilitate peer learning, but it will also develop a monitoring approach for on the fundamental values. So monitor how they are de jure, but also de facto respected and implemented. Another important topic is social inclusion, access, equity, for which we have, it's not a new topic. It has been addressed, as I mentioned, since quite a while. But for the first time here, we have a set of 10 principles and guidelines to strengthen the social dimension. They address national authorities who are advised in collaboration with higher education institutions and with other important stakeholders and actors to improve the situation in their respective countries. For the very first time, we have, with the recommendations for European ministers, a more extended paper on learning and teaching. It addresses things which we all know, of course, such as student-centered learning, but it provides real recommendations on how they should be addressed and implemented in the different systems, and also addresses the enhancement of the higher education institutions and the systems themselves. So the first time that we actually have joint document on learning and teaching in the process. Already in 2009, the process has set out a concrete goal for mobility. The aim was to have 20% graduates to have had a mobility experience by 2020. At that time, 2020 looked far away. Now we are in 2020, and we have to admit we did not even achieve half of it. Nevertheless, the ministers were quite confident, and they reconfirmed the goal, reiterated the goal, and added yet another goal, namely that all graduates should have an international experience, and we will see how this is to be done. In all these discussions on topics, I think an undercurrent discussion has always been what actually changes beyond the communiques, what is implemented and how quickly is it implemented. And more recently, in 2018, this was the reason to establish the so-called peer learning mechanism. So bringing representative stakeholders from different countries together and advise each other on how the implementation of the concrete Bologna commitments cannot be only transposed in national law and regulation, but also implemented in institutional reality. So this is one approach that is taken, and we have a first report on that. But there is also, and there has been also in the past two communiques, more talk about more and more active involvement of the higher education sector, because it is felt there is quite a gap, quite a discrepancy between the goals of the process and its implementation on the ground. So that's probably as a starter here, as an overview, and we will try to address some of these topics. They are on the agenda from now on, basically, not only for us here, but for the wider European community and the colleagues and active in the Bologna process. And in 2024, we will all gather in Albania then for the next ministerial conference. And until then, the Albanian Secretariat, Albania has taken this over now, will guide and support the process. So this is an introduction, and probably I take that down. Maybe we can take the slides down. We don't need that anymore. And to start it, I think, as we all have been there at the ministerial conference, I think what really struck us when the ministers started to speak, and it was Thomas Rachel from Germany who made this bold statement about values and how important they are. And while I think he didn't mention the name of a particular country, everybody knew who he was pointing to. But he also made clear that this was not only about Belarus, but that this is a call for all of us. I'm asking Gohar and Marcin, probably starting with Gohar. I mean, how do you see that? What do you think has to be improved in the next years, generally, or also in the particular system where you come from? Gohar? Okay. Well, I hope it doesn't continue like this. So I turn to Marcin first and hope that Gohar comes back. So Marcin, the same question to you. I mean, how do you see the need for improvement, probably across Europe, but also more specifically in your own country? What can we do jointly to improve the situation?
Okay. Well, I think that indeed the formulation about values was quite firm during the ministerial conference. And I think that it's very good that we have this Annex 1 of the communique with the list of the academic values, but also, what I think very important, their interdependencies, which are presented in the both concise and pragmatic way. It says that the academic values, it's not a collection of different things, but it's rather a set of that has a ruling concept. So I think that what we need is to counteract the growing misunderstanding among the broad public what are the academic values and what is their working. I think that the situation with the broad public and with the politics could be very well described by quote from the president of the Dutch Academy of Sciences from some time ago. She said, "Science is not just an opinion." And I think that this is something that the broad public is not understanding well and sometimes not believing well. What we can improve? I would like to put 5 points. Point 1 is raise awareness of academic values and their interdependencies. But it's not just a call for more communication, but it's rather to raise interest in academic values among the broad public. Because without this interest, communication will go to the void. Nobody will listen to it. Well, the second point is I think we could better show how the values are implemented. And the implementation is primarily the task for the universities. And the public authorities or politicians cannot replace universities in this implementation. The third point is that we should, in my opinion, embed academic values better in learning and teaching process. Those values, in fact, make a difference between the universities and commercial course providers, whether online or in classic form. And without those embedding these values in the teaching and learning, we will not have the educated people that really embed their values in their everyday life. Well, then the point 4 is to work on tools and measures or the ways how to assess how the academic values are implemented. We have in EUA a very good example of the autonomy scorecard, the project that has been prepared some years ago, and it works very well. It's one of those attempts how to measure, how to gauge the institutional autonomy. But it would be good to discuss and to try to find out what could be the measures for academic integrity, academic freedom, participation, those concepts which are not very easy to be measured, but which are very important, and knowledge on how they are implemented is essential. And the last point is that we should not avoid the debating and reflecting of difficult issues of balancing some concepts. For example, how to balance the participation, which usually goes on behalf of own group, with the feeling of responsibility for other groups. Because rights of ones are often duties of others. So how to balance being the representative with the care for the common good? Or another thing that might be not easy to balance is the academic freedom, which is the individual right, with the institutional autonomy, which is a collective right. And sometimes they can be in a conflict, larger or smaller, but I think we should debate it and have some clues about this. Finally, I think that with this discussion on the values, it is good to think how those values are implemented now. I would like to quote, as a last sentence, something that the president of the student union in University of Warsaw said during the opening of the academic year. What does it mean, academic community, in times of home office and remote learning? Thank you.
Thanks, Marcin. And as you pointed out, that this is in first also a task for the universities, my question would have been, are you facing these challenges in your university, or are you having these discussions there? And with a quote from the student representative, I assume that almost answered the question. So it is something that you address with students and staff. So the different roles that you have when we talk about the participation of students and staff in governance.
Well, it is the discussion that takes place in Poland and in my university, University of Warsaw as well. But it's the discussion that it's not easy. Sometimes people try to avoid discussing how we can implement the academic value because they feel that there is something that everyone knows in her or his guts. What does it mean, the academic value? However, it's not so common with the broader public. So, and in the times of the massive education and huge universities, it's not so sure anymore that every student understands it in the same way as the older generation used to understand. So I think we need a discussion, but this discussion is not away and not isolated from the discussions in the societies. We see the surge of kind of different political and difficult political attitudes with the demagogy, and it also starts to play some role in the universities. For example, in Poland, the society is very heavily polarized because of the political situation. Unfortunately, this polarization also enters the university from time to time, making the discussions difficult. So what I would say about the working of Bologna process in our this whole discussion about the values in our system in Poland, it would be the appeal to the politicians to stop polarizing the society for the political goods and start to think how we can together discuss about the things that are joining us, which are common to us, and not those who are making us different or standing at different sides of the debate.
Okay, thanks so much. And I think I can confirm some of the things that you said also from the position of from the reflections that we had in the Bologna follow-up group, where it was not only about what happens inside the university, but also in the whole social environment, which made it necessary to emphasize the values stronger and also share your statement that it is not easy to address it, but I think we all feel better since we started to address it. So in this regards, that could really make a difference across Europe. But maybe Goha who came back in the right moment, can share her view on the issue of the values. Goha, can you hear me now? No, that's not the case. So I think we continue for the moment without Goha. And I move on to the next topic, which is social inclusion. And so, as I said already, this is a topic which has been almost for 20 years addressed by the BFUG. And there have been also frequent appeals to take it down or to downtone it, because it was felt it's so difficult to address that, given that the countries are so different. You have social welfare systems that are differently, and so it has a completely different meaning everywhere. But it is also, and it has stayed there, and it has had a kind of renaissance over the last years, I would say, not at least thanks to the European Student Union, who has been pushing for that and has been co-chairing the last working group that came up with these principles. How do you see that, Josep? I mean, you had a look at the principles, but also as a rector, you know, of course, the issue quite well. What's your view of that? What could the Bologna process achieve? And probably also, what are these principles useful in your national context?
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me. I am really glad to join this webinar. Trying to answer your questions, I think that when we talk about the role and the importance of education in our societies and also for higher education, we are in fact thinking that the benefits and the effects of the education should be for everybody and for the whole lifetime. So we are thinking about the concept of social inclusion in general, and what it means can be summarized by the expression of leaving no one behind that we can read in the Rome Communiqué several times. In fact, if you read the Rome Communiqué, you can find a sentence that says, and I am going to read it exactly, quote, learners with diverse socioeconomic, professional, cultural, and educational backgrounds must have the possibility and the tools to seek out and avail themselves at any time of life of the educational option most useful for them, end quote. So the declaration is here, and I think that we are making progress both at national and international and institutional level also. If you take a look to the evolution of several indicators, such as the percentage of population with higher education studies in different countries, or the percentage of population that have access to lifelong learning, more or less each indicator is progressing. And moving forward to the second part of your question, the principle and guidelines that are particularly impactful, I think that all 10 are important, but let me just highlight two. The one that stresses the importance of developing coherent policies from primary school to lifelong learning in terms of achieving the real concept of leaving no one behind, because it is well known that inequality begins before higher education. And the second principle that I would like to highlight is the one that talks about funding related to inclusion in higher education. And this is a key point, and it is linked to social and political models and debates, as you said before, because in the end, the question is who is going to pay for what? The correct balance between public and private funding, the debate about the freedom to choose among the different higher education institutions, both at national or international, both public or private, etc. So I think that the declaration is clear. Everybody wants to work for social inclusion. They signed something similar to a set of guidelines. It is indeed declared that the guidelines are not a checklist, but maybe it should be a checklist. In fact, nobody talks about how we can work together to reach such goals. And it is obvious to me that the different countries will have different speeds of progress, as it has happened throughout history. So I think that that doing a public and explicit exercise of, let's say, progress comparison will be very interesting.
So you could see this actually as an agenda for Spain in your system. I asked that also because we fought a lot for the last principles, which said that this should be transposed in dialogue and collaboration with the higher education institutions and other stakeholders. So because we didn't want to have it just as a top-down action.
I agree with you. I think that it should be a balance between a top-down and a bottom-up approach, that the different higher education institutions should be engaged in this dialogue, and social inclusion is a subject that we should face all together.
Goha, you have been, ESU has been behind that. I mean, it's fair to say that. I think you have put lots of energy into that and made it what it is today. And I think it's probably one of the better documents that the process has achieved over the year. Would you want to say something about that? I mean, how do you see the state of social inclusion, access, equity, and how does that relate to the principles?
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm so glad that the technology worked, at least for this part, so I can reflect on this very important question for ESU, because indeed I know even from my predecessors, who have been doing a lot of work on Bologna, on how much social dimension has been important and how much the organization has been trying to bring it on the agenda. And we were just so happy that during the current still BFUG cycle, we managed to work on the topic of social dimension. And I very much agree by the priorities that now Josep Garrel identified, which I could see from the institutional level as being really important priorities. And the 10th principle, which identifies that there needs to be a dialogue. So we indeed want to see that all different stakeholders come together to just talk about the importance for social dimension, because we see that this should be a core priority, a core principle on which we focus our higher education system. And I think this is very well summarized in the first principle that says social dimension should be central to higher education strategies, both in the European level and in the institutional level. So I think this first principle kind of summarizes that we need to bring it to the center. And I would say that, yes, sadly, the progress on social dimension in general within the higher education reform agenda has not been very much extensively observed. So that's why we have these principles here, which hopefully will serve as a good guidance to also come up with certain measurable criteria so that we can actually look and kind of measure what countries are really doing to promote social dimension. And obviously, as it was mentioned, just making sure that no one is left behind should be an agenda for us. And the pandemic, our current situation, just highlighted this more. So we hopefully can continue working on this in the next BFUG cycle. We are very much looking forward to that.
Okay. Well, as you mentioned it already, how do you think should the follow-up on this look like? I mean, we have now 4 years to go until the next ministerial meeting. How to ensure that we don't find out in 2024 these were nice principles, but actually not many have acted upon them?
Yeah, that's a really good concern, because it often happens that we come with these very good outcomes on the policy level, but then when we look into implementation, we see that something is missing. I think the part that normally is missing the most when we talk about policy being implemented at the practice level is helping those who need to implement the policy identify what are their needs. So I think what is an agenda for the Bologna process for the next 4 years is to help the countries that will come together in the next advisory group that will work on the social dimension. The agenda will be to help them to look together what so far is happening in the countries when it comes to social dimension and what do they need. And when I say what do they need, this would be not just like what do they need because it's written in the document, but what do they really need, to change in the system to make sure that social dimension is seen as a priority, and also to help the countries to understand how this can actually help their systems to evolve, their systems to give better opportunities to students to come and study, but obviously to also generate a better human resource of students that comes to higher education and involves and engages with it. So if we achieve this type of dialogue between different member states that will come together to identify the needs in line with the principles and guidelines, I think we will manage to put a good, we will create the steps of actually implementing these principles and guidelines.
Should there be reporting on it?
I wouldn't mind that. I think. I think reporting. Always, there's always I think 2 different perspectives that people either like reporting or don't like reporting. But I guess because Bologna process is a process based on trust. It is a process, and I was actually going to reflect on this also in the values discussion, that this is a process that we come together with a feeling that we should trust each other in order to be able to make a progress. And reporting I see as a factor that just ensures that there is trust in what is being done, but also there is, there is learning from each other, because we often learn new things when we read reports. So I would say it would be good to come up with a reporting mechanism.
Okay, good. Well, thanks for that. I'm carrying on to the next topic, which is learning and teaching. This I always found a little bit curious, because the whole process is about improving education, enhancing education. But apart from emphasizing student-centered learning, and the student experience, the Bologna process hasn't really said much about learning and teaching, in particular not about teachers. It started only in 2015. And now we have, for the very first time, actually a document which extensively talks about what the different higher education systems should do on learning and teaching. Gohan, maybe you carry on. What's your view on that? What has been the change in the recent years, and probably also what do you see what these principles could address and change for the future?
Yeah, thank you very much for this question, because I think we were seeing during the past years that at least the discussion about learning and teaching comes more on the agenda. Maybe on the practical level, it's still not in place, at the universities, well, at least not for the majority of the universities, but at least on the policy level discussions, this would come up a lot as an important priority to think about. And I think one particular dimension of these discussions that is very, very useful to look into is keeping the balance between promotion of the learning and teaching and promotion of research, like of academic development, of academic career for teachers and professors. And I think this particular document that is now developed through the Bologna process brings this balanced perspective and focuses on the need that we need to balance and bring learning and teaching to the life of self-development of teachers or professors, and that learning and teaching should become a focus for their work in parallel to the research work, let's say, that they are doing. And indeed, as you mentioned, within the Bologna process, this hasn't been an important priority over the past 2 decades, besides this last cycle, because we would always see that learning and teaching has somehow been mentioned in communiques. There were different phrasings. Student-centered learning came up also over the last decade at least, and was in place. But I think now we laid a good kind of ground with these recommendations for enhancement of the learning and teaching for the next steps to be taken already for practical implementation.
Marcin, would you like to comment on that? Same question.
Well, yes, I think that what the Bologna is important in is the way how it really affects the manner of teaching and learning in particular universities. And in our university, we have worked recently a lot on increasing the participation of students in setting up the new courses, modifying curricula, the quality assessment, but also on the organization of teaching, to find out how the administrative rules, even low-level rules in the university, how they support those goals we set as the goals for the entire university. There was quite a number of interesting outcomes of this discussion. As with every discussion, there is a question of how well we will be able to implement these outcomes in the daily routine, which is, universities are usually quite conservative institutions, and change is not very easy with them. But what we also tried to implement is to bring more research results-based education, particularly in social sciences. And I'm quite excited about how it will work out. But generally, if the Bologna process is expected to be fulfilled with all those goals we set, I think we need a lot more of the flexibility comparing to what is the current situation. I think the flexibility in, for example, the duration of the courses, the starting of the courses, of the recognition of results, automatic recognition of results achieved in different institutions, And it is even more important with the COVID situation, in which we have to switch to the short-termism and making a planning on the extremely short terms, because long view is quite unknown, and the future is not predictable. And I think that I would like to say here something that is connected to what I said previously. There is especially also with Bologna, there is a problem of I would call it a freshman problem. Those students who start the education at the university after finishing the secondary education, how to give them university experience if so many courses are done remotely. Without being on the campus. It is very important because we think that the university education, which all the university institutions in the Bologna system share, is that it's not only accumulating of the knowledge by the student, but also internalization of values, of those values we have spoken before. So it's the way how we are able to give this university experience in these different times. It is also the looking at the definition of what does it mean in current situation, the international experience, which is quoted in the Bologna documents. So I think that this university experience and international experience are in the current times quite closely related, and we should try to find out the answers to both these questions.
We're getting to the international experience in a second. Just to pick up one point that Goha addressed, and that is also in the recommendations, and that are the career paths, which are still determined by research achievement. Is that something that we would not have to address? I mean, when we look at some studies which seem to indicate that this takes away all the attention that one could spend on teaching.
Well, yes, I would say that this was the point that I considered the key point for the recommendations was to choose, and my personal choice as well, how to make this parity, as it's called, parity of esteem for research and teaching. It's still very far from reality. We postulate it, but we still are quite far away from seeing it implemented. So this is indeed this would be for me the key recommendation.
Mm-hmm. Before I come to Josep on this point, Therese, is there anything from the chat that we should address at this stage?
Yes, there is only one camera. I'm trying to enable my own camera, but yes, okay, it's there. We have only one question for so far, and it actually relates not that much on the topics that we have just discussed, but to how you would see Bologna basically addressing and reflecting on the challenges that have been brought by the pandemic. Don't think you would have escaped any question about COVID. I guess this is so much in the air, we need somehow to address it. The communiqué somehow mentions it in the opening part, but perhaps our speakers also would like to comment on this.
Absolutely, yeah. So, Josep?
Thank you, Michael. I'm going to repeat the concepts that Gohar and Marcin said before, but I am going to stress several of them. It is worth to say that learning and teaching is the central core of the higher education institution's mission. But almost everybody will agree that too many times when people talk about universities, they focus their attention into research activities mainly. Marcin said a lot of things about that. So during lots of years, the explicit reputation of both academics and also higher education institutions has been churning around research and not around learning and teaching. It is, from my opinion, a question of priorities. But I think that we must be optimistic because more and more people talk about that. Today we are talking about that. So it means that each time there are more people worried about the need to stress the importance of learning and teaching in universities, in higher education in general. Concepts such as the need to make student-centered a reality and link it to regulation or funding of universities are good news. And also to explicitly address the need to assure the parity of esteem for teaching and research in the academic career schemes are good news. As Marcin said, I think, and I agree with him, that it is a key point. Okay, both concepts are included in the documents of the Rome conference. And trying to connect to COVID-19, I think that the COVID-19 pandemic is showing us that when people are really worried is when universities cannot develop their first mission. And also what people really appreciate is the solutions that university came out with. In my opinion, COVID-19 is, let's say, accelerating lots of debates. The pandemic situation has broken taboos, and some innovations, some solutions just have come to stay, or at least to stay in part. I don't mean that all the universities will move to virtual. I mean that the learning and teaching process will be understood as a process that uses a mix of solutions, a mix of situation, and also a mix of several innovations. For instance, the concept of virtuality, I think that will be reconsidered, and some traditional virtual approaches, such as the video conferencing tool, will be understood as a type of a face-to-face interaction. At least I think so.
Did it not also make a strong point for the institutions as such? I mean, given that there were so many things which we were probably theoretically able to do, but we didn't do them, that could be turned against the universities. But on the other hand, universities have been able to respond to the crisis in a relatively short time, pivoting to online provision. Okay, we agree that has not always and everywhere be the ideal way of providing education, but at least, they were not completely lost. So is that an argument for institutions and the capacities that institutions hold? I mean, we can now prepare for the next crisis, but we have no idea on whether that would again require online teaching or maybe have to respond to some other challenges. Goha.
Yeah, I think indeed how Bologna process can help us to respond to all these challenges. I've been thinking about this a lot myself, because I started, in general, my involvement with the student movement started working on the Bologna process from that particular point. It was like 5 years ago, and since then, like, I'm constantly thinking, what will be the benefit that Bologna process can bring to its members, to all the countries that join the Bologna process. And I think that the benefit is simply the network, because we have so many countries, right? We have 49 or already 50 countries that are part of the Bologna process. 49, okay, yeah, and in each of these countries, we have a particular expertise developed in relation to higher education. And we have all these ministries committed to the Bologna process, coming together to exchange views on particular topics that are defined as priorities for the Bologna process. Now, the COVID situation showed to us that basically all the higher education as a complex system was affected, right? So every single aspect of higher education was affected, whether that's the learning and teaching, that's the social dimension of education, that's recognition procedures, quality assurance, everything was affected. And obviously all these countries on their own somehow started coping with it, because they had to, the external circumstances just forced us to cope with it. And obviously, some countries did it better, the other countries didn't do it that well, but we have this platform where we can get to to know all these different approaches that the countries took, and we can get to understand why that particular approach worked better and why the other one didn't work. So I think this is the benefit that the Bologna process brings to all its member countries, but we just, like all member countries, just need to figure out how do they want to embrace it, what's the best way for them to use it. And obviously, when the ministries come together, this doesn't mean that solely the representatives of those ministries are part of the Bologna process, but the whole country is a part of Bologna process with all its member universities. Let's say, like in each country, we have higher education institutions who also, through Bologna process, can connect and reach out to another higher education institution in another country and learn their experience. This is where I see the benefit of the Bologna process, and I just hope that all these external changes, such as the pandemic and other challenges that the pandemic showed us that higher education has, will force the universities, in a way, kind of be an extra push for universities to acknowledge that they need cooperation. They need to work with other institutions, and they don't need to, make their own, create a new bicycle for something that they want to do, but they can just ask about someone else's experience and understand how to use that same experience for their own context.
Well, I think we have quite a bit of evidence that this actually happened. And also when you talk about country approaches, we have seen systems where the universities basically started to develop their own approach of doing it. Like, for example, here in Belgium, the rectors' conferences have announced very early on that they would close the institution until summer, and didn't follow the government's salami approach of changing the rules every two weeks, So, but I think, yes, it's an important point. Anybody to comment on that?
About the salami?
Salami was probably the wrong word.
No,
but about the,
I
mean, my question was about the institution, of course, and Goha is, of course, right. We have also some evidence that institutions that were networked and worked together, that they were in a better position during the crisis. So,
well, I also think that generally the students appreciate the working of Bologna process, and I haven't found criticism among the students that the Bologna process is something wrong, goes into the wrong direction and should be abandoned. Rather, vice versa. The expectations from students was that it works better, it is more compatible, and that it could be better used by the students. So from this point of view, we are not discussing whether it goes in the good direction, but rather how to make it more efficient and how to take out more of the profits for everyone involved from this process.
Okay. Yeah,
Michael, if you don't mind, let me add that,
sure.
that to find the correct balance between what the university should do and what the different governments said that we must do, it's difficult. So I appreciate the joke about the salami, because it's exactly the description. We need to make a clear academic planification for the whole academic year, and this is very, very difficult in terms of uncertainty. So I think that everybody is doing our best, including the different governments and the public health authorities. But it's a very, very difficult situation. I think that we just ask to everybody to understand that we are exactly doing our best to cope with the situation.
Okay, thanks. Good. Our next topic would then be, and Marcin mentioned it already, the international experience, the mobility. I mentioned earlier to you what was the plan for 2020 and what are the realities. So we achieved only half of the physical mobility that we wanted to have. How do you see that now? The goal is reinstated. Goha will confirm that there has been no big discussion about how we will actually achieve it. It's just, it's out there, and we have to do something about it. But what exactly? So how to have more mobility? I mean, the Erasmus budget is not so big that we would all say that's no problem. And I think there are also other aspects. I mean, we are talking more and more about greening and sustainability. Is there not a kind of contradiction there? On the one hand side, we want to become greener. On the other hand, we say everybody has to get mobile. I start with Joseph here.
Thank you. Well, this is a very, very interesting set of questions, and I'm afraid that I don't have answers, but I will give a try. To put it in context, let me say that at my university, we have a ratio of 20% of international students. And if we add the mobility of students, this percentage rise up to 26%, more or less. So this is a very important concept for my university and for myself. We share the goal that to give the opportunity of having an international experience for each and every student, it's very, very important. And this is because we live in an only global world. So we teach local and foreign students that will work abroad and locally. So we think that it is our duty to give our students an international, at least, perspective. Mobility is a tool for achieving this objective. In fact, it is a very important tool, but I think that it is not the only one. I think that too often we only focus on students and we don't focus on the importance of having international academic and administrative staff at our universities. Maybe we are not focusing enough on including the necessary international perspective in the curricula, etc. Internationalization, from my opinion, is a set of transversal things in our institutions. So when going back to mobility, we are required to find a balance among different things, such as the balance between European and national funds that truly allow our students to move. And that's not the case today. Or second, the balance between physical mobility and one thing that, to be honest, I really don't know what it means, that is virtual mobility. Of course, the carbon footprint that you mentioned should not be underestimated. And it is important to keep talking about that, because we are also living other global pandemics, the ones described by the SDGs, that I hope it will come back to the head news once the COVID-19 disappears, hopefully. So lots of questions to share and not many answers, I'm afraid.
Well, thanks. Marcin, what's your view?
Well, I think that the benchmark of 20% is still very high. It could be easier to attain it in some countries and in some systems, and in others it will be difficult. It's still a lot of complex logistics and preparation for the mobility, and I think this is a kind of the burden that has been complained about quite a lot. I think that the COVID is a good stimulus for thinking about also shorter stays and shorter mobility in the shorter time than just a semester or 1 year. And flexibility of courses could be, and the whole discussion about the micro-credentials could be helping in attaining mobility, which is rather high, although not spanning over so long time for every involved individual. Joseph said very important things about the everyday problems that someone who wants to have the international experience meets at the daily university life. But we have quite recently quite a good test ground for overcoming, or at least trying to overcome all those difficulties. And it is the concept of European universities. They are in fact pioneers and kind of a prototypes for quite advanced mobility and international experience. You probably remember that the target there was set at 50% of the mobility. And I think that the universities involved in the European university are working already hard on how to overcome all those practical difficulties. There was yesterday a UNICA seminar on European universities with quite interesting discussions. But I would like to say two more things. One is about the differences of the perspectives for mobility in different systems. There is a question of the language. There are international languages, and for universities working in the countries with international languages, it is quite easy to have both the influx and the outflux of the students in the mobility schemes. But with countries with the languages which are not so popular, sometimes they are called small languages, it is a challenge, because there are more students who would like to go away to different countries, but the influx is much smaller because of the language challenge. So this is something that should be also addressed in the discussions. And finally, about the greening of the mobility. There are very interesting ideas how to make the mobility greener. For example, refunding only the ways of travel which are green, or the similar concepts. I was really impressed by how many different interesting ideas are coming from the discussions, and especially among the students. There is a huge number of very brilliant ideas how to bring into the balance the mobility with the sustainable development goals. So we should really give more work to the students about how to balance these things.
I think that's an interesting point, to not only see it as a utility, but also look at the broader aspects of this greening. Goha, you have the last word in this round.
I can very much agree with what mentioned about giving a voice to students more to come up with creative ways, because indeed I think that students have this potential of bringing innovation into looking into this aspect, and just to what Professor Martin Pallis mentioned about let's say, looking into more sustainable ways of traveling. Something can also be related to looking into more connectedness of European countries through railway rather than through airplanes. So, and all these systems just need to be built. We all need to build together these systems, but we don't need to kind of put on hold the physical mobility for that sake, but we can come up with other creative ways to really give a physical mobility experience to students, because we truly believe at the European Students' Union that international mobility experience is not just the formal learning that could happen in a different university, but it's also a lot of informal learning that happens even on the way when students are traveling, even on that way when they might get on a train and, spend 10 hours in a train to get to another country. This is a huge learning experience for a young individual. So I believe that we need to indeed look into this very creatively and understand how we can make sure that we give the mobility experience to students.
Good. So we keep mobility, but make it greener. I think that's a good point. We are actually already over time, but I badly want to address also the last point that I have here on my list. And this is actually on the impact of the Bologna process. I'm actually regret that Michael Murphy can't be with us, because that's an important a point that he emphasizes frequently. So how do you think the process can be more impactful, achieve better outcomes? I mentioned that unlike probably 10 years ago, it's also an ongoing discussion in the Bologna process on how to improve it, how can the process tangibly take out also some of the obstacles that you still may face in your systems. Josep.
Wow, this is a very, very interesting topic, Michael. And I think that we don't have much more time to talk about that in depth that it requires, but I completely agree that the implementation of Bologna reforms is different from one country to another. I think that each country adopted the big and structural reforms needed, but let me say that sometimes the devil is in the details. Just 3 examples to reflect on. First, the level of bureaucracy required in the different countries, and this is related to the second example I'm going to give, that is the university autonomy from a legal point of view, of course. And the third example to reflect on is the required ex-ante and ex-post accreditation process and their weight from one country to another. If you take these examples, and I think that you can complement these ones with others, the question about international cooperation among universities for things such as joint or double degrees or other types of cooperation, I think that the question about topics like this require a reflection. Probably you will agree with me that there is still a long way to go. And from my opinion, we need a better and deeper balance and coordination between international and national administrations and also policymakers. I know that the Bologna Declaration is signed by more countries than the ones that belong to the European Union, but in the context of the European Union, there are more steps that can be taken to improve and especially to speed up the required reforms for building a better European higher education area and also for helping higher education institutions and universities in general to do so. And if you don't mind, I am going to stop here with this topic.
That's okay. Any views on that, Goroha?
I can just say that I think the impact of the Bologna process increases when we are talking about it, when we are once in a while, especially in the national levels, different stakeholders would come and talk about what is it that Bologna process is bringing on the agenda, and how we can kind of project this priority on our national system. And why I say talking, because I can totally imagine, that everyone in different ministries or everyone in different higher education institutions is always very busy because there is always something to do. Like there is always a lot of work that needs to be done. However, just like sometimes certain priorities come up and then other things become less important because we realize that if we go and do this priority, it might help us to deal with other things. So that's why I think that just genuine conversations, discussions, dialogues about the implementation of Bologna priorities, and whether these are the principles and guidelines for social dimension or the recommendations for learning and teaching, or any other thing that Bologna is looking into, kind of bringing all these 49 countries together to look into that aspect. A dialogue on this would help countries to bring that topic as a priority item on the agenda for any other stakeholder in the country. And then we achieve the impact.
Okay. Yeah, Josep? Sorry, Marcin. Yeah.
If I can add something to what has been already said, with which I agree, is that we could think about the lifting of the national bureaucratic overheads that were imposed at top of the Bologna rules and the Bologna system. I think that for some people have the experience that much of the burden of the implementing has already been overloaded on the system, but not all the opportunities are used yet. So removal of these bureaucratic overheads could help definitely. I also think that the better alignment of the automatic recognition of achievements would be something that could help. That was Joseph said about the ex post and ex ante recognition, which is a really a burden for the students and for the universities. And finally, I think that it is good to have this discussion about the multilingualism, because the Bologna system and the Common European Higher Education Area is the perfect tool to implement some ideas from this multilingualism in Europe. So that would be my points added to the better impact of Bologna.
Okay, we are already over time, and I think that was a nice closing. So basically a plea to carry on the process, but make it more problem focused. Let's put it like this. So take up the real issues that matter at national institutional levels and try really to address them. And I think that could be a good conclusion for the next round as well. I would like to thank you for your readiness to participate here and the good exchanges, and well, look forward to dialogue with you on Bologna on other occasions. Thanks for the participants here also for joining us. As you are aware, this was the last of the 7 Bologna seminars that we have carried out up to the ministerial conference, and this is the concluding one afterwards, but it's certainly not the last one that we will have organized on Bologna. So thanks for all, and have a good afternoon. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Bye.
much. Have a good day.